Okay, today my guest is Professor Luis Gomez-Mejia. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Luis as a person. Professor Gomez-Mejia is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally is a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Luis Gomez-Mejia is a fellow of the AOM and a Regents Professor and Chair in Arizona State University. His research focuses on the relationships of international management, strategic management, executive compensation, and family business. He is among the most published authors at our top management journals. He has published more than 250 articles in Academy of Management Journal, Academy of Management Review, Strategic Management Journal, ASQ, among others. He has many accomplishments and received many awards. He has received the exemplary award from the PhD project for his service, and he was selected to the Academy of Management's Hall of Fame based on his publications in the academic journals. He has served as the president of Ibero-American AOM 3 times and was the program chair, division chair at various AOM conferences. Thank you, Luis, for joining us.
Well, thanks to you for the invitation.
Thanks. First question always, what did you want to become when you were a child?
I wasn't sure, frankly. I never had a clear idea of what I wanted to become. As a matter of fact, I wasn't sure I was going to become an academic until I was about 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in industry. I was working at Control Data Corporation. I worked there for about 8 years. And I was one of the very few who got my PhD part-time, believe it or not. Now you couldn't do that. It took me about 10 years to get my PhD because I was working basically full-time at Control Data. And then, I like writing, so I wrote a few papers when I was working full-time. And some of those papers were published in the Academy of Management Journal, which is, at the time, I didn't even know what that meant, really.
It means something. Let me tell you, it means something. Okay,
Yes.
Luis, where did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
Yeah. But I grew up in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic.
Okay.
So,
and between where you were and your part-time PhD education, why did you pursue academic career?
I liked, frankly, I guess I like the flexibility that it provides, for one thing. That's one of the things that attracted me, to this career. I enjoy, writing and enjoy, doing my own things. I went to school. I went to Catholic school. I went to Jesuit school, and I had some excellent mentors in high school in Santo Domingo. I have to say that. So that's where I picked up a lot of my interest, really, working with some of the brilliant, Jesuit priests that helped me, they taught me how to write. They taught me how to think, philosophy, those kinds of things when I was really a little kid, basically. So that's how I started doing some of that. And I began to do some research, actually, even in high school. I remember doing some research on poverty in the Dominican Republic, doing some research on the family in the Dominican Republic. So I always had, I had a curiosity to figure out, why are people poor? Why is there inequality in the world? Why do we find that some people succeed and others don't? Those kinds of questions, were always of interest to me. And of course, being born in Santo Domingo, I mean, I went through a civil war, by the way, in 1965, where the Marines, the US Marines intervened back in 1965. There were 42,000 Marines. So I knew firsthand, what civil strife could look like. And that's another thing that kind of always crossed my mind, why can people somehow manage to bridge the differences without resorting to violence? Those kinds of things. So that's sort of my general background.
I mean, whatever they taught you at the Jesuit school, it worked out perfectly. When did you realize that you were a great writer? After how many AMRs, AMJs did you realize that you were really great at this?
I had no idea, but I mean, eventually probably got maybe 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is interesting. Okay.
But, so, yeah, so, and, frankly, I didn't know how difficult it was. Now people tell me how difficult it is. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but,
Okay. Something that is not on your CV that people might find interesting about you.
Well, I guess one interesting thing is I worked in a lot of different areas. My degree was actually more in industrial relations. And so I started doing work in human resource management, and work on incentive compensation. And from there, I moved more into the strategy area, more general strategy. So, do work on diversification, acquisitions, mergers, executive compensation, those kinds of things. And then I got into the international management area. We got some papers in JIPS, looking at the effect of cultural differences on performance of multinational firms. We had a paper on the maquiladora plants in Mexico, for example, that we published in JIPS. I also I had some AMJs, some academic management journal papers on how cultural values tend to be a reflection not only of the culture, but also the professions, people professions or occupations. So if you're an engineer, you tend to have some common values no matter where you are, for example. So anyway, and then, eventually I landed with the family business stuff, which I've been doing the last maybe 15, 20 years. And, some of that you talk about my childhood. I mean, some of that go back to my childhood because my parents and grandparents had family business. So I had that experience early on. I could see some of the issues and challenges that they face. So later on, I became interested in kind of applying academic, an academic perspective to family businesses. So that's how I got into that area the last 15, 20 years.
When you look back, do you say, I should have done something else, I should have pursued something else? Do you have any regrets in life?
Any regrets? God, I couldn't think, maybe it's just me, but I couldn't, no, really. I mean, because when I go back to my corporate life, in retrospect, I thought I had a good deal there. I mean, I actually enjoyed corporate life and I was making a lot of money. But in retrospect, to me, the best decision I made was to leave corporate life and get into academia. So no, I mean, I couldn't think of any regrets that I may have, actually.
Okay. What are you most proud of?
Most proud of?
Mm-hmm.
Probably, probably that I've been able to work in so many different areas. A lot of my colleagues just work in one area. They work on a particular topic, and they remain kind of very focused or restricted to that. And, I guess I'm proud of the fact that I've been able to work across, a wide span of,
Okay.
management issues, from OB to human resources, to international management, to strategic management, to entrepreneurship. And sometimes people have a hard time defining me, actually. So I'm not alike, I guess I'm proud of that.
How do you define yourself then? So you're stranded on the side of the road in a small village. People are curious about you. They ask you, so what do you do? What do you do for a living? You say, I'm a professor. And people think, okay, he's a teacher. But how do you explain the importance of your research? What do you do? To people who don't read academic stuff.
I see what you're saying. What is the common thread? I think the common thread is the influence of the dominant owners on firm decisions, the interest, the utilities, and drivers of the dominant owners. I guess to me that kind of comes across a lot of what I do. Whether it's internationalization, diversification, or whether it's executive compensation or family and family business, I mean, that's sort of a common thread.
Do you work every day?
Huh?
Do you write every day? Do you work every day?
I do work every day. I do work every day, yes. And
What's the process like? What's the process like for you for coming up with some interesting idea? What is the mind? What does your mind think of in a state of idle curiosity? How do you come up with paper ideas?
Oh, I like to daydream. Sometimes you just lay back and think, just kind of like a free flow of ideas. And also just talking to people, ideas just flow from talking to people. Particularly colleagues in different areas. I mean, I work with a lot of different colleagues. I've worked with hundreds of colleagues. Just talking to people, see what they do, what they're working on, and see how I can connect what they're doing with what I know, basically. So,
but just between you and me, Luis, writing 250 plus papers in the top journals is a bit more than luck. There's a trick. So basically everyone is waiting for you to give them the trick. What is the trick? What is the secret?
I think the trick, frankly, first of all, you have to, writing is important, clearly. I think honestly, a big part of the trick is selling. You have to be able to sell whatever you're doing. The most difficult part of writing a paper is to show the reviewer or someone else, why is this important? Who cares about this? Why is this so critical that it should be a paper being written on this? And I think that's the most difficult part, really, of a paper, to come up with a list of things that someone can look at them and say, this is important. And that's part of the marketing, the selling, the crafting, the crafting of the paper. I mean, that's a challenge. It's a challenge. And I think it's becoming more difficult too. I have to be honest with you. I think it's becoming much more difficult to publish in those journals. In my opinion, not because the journals are getting any better, but rather because there's a lot more variance in terms of reviewers, associate editors.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult to predict how they're going to react.
About things that are neglected in research, contexts, elements, variables that we should have covered more of. What is going to be important in the next 5 to 10 years in the field? What kind of questions, what kind of context is more important for us to pursue?
Well, I think, the family business stuff is one area that I think it's still going to grow a lot. Just because 90% of companies around the world are controlled by families. And I think even when that research has grown, there's still quite a bit of research to be done. There are many questions that are meant to be answered in that particular area. Questions like how do families handle conflict, for example. How when they internationalize, why do they move into particular areas of the world, family businesses. Are family businesses more or less risk-taking? To what extent family businesses are willing to sacrifice performance or financial gains for something else that is not financial.
Mm-hmm.
That trade-off. A lot of those questions still remain to be explored, and another question that also I think remains and there's some papers that I worked on, one we published in JIPS recently. Another question is, do you find that different cultural environments are more supportive for families than others?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's another interesting question.
So your focus for the future, your suggestion for the future is basically family business internationalization processes, right?
Yes.
Okay. About the evolution of the field from where it started from many years ago to where it is headed to, where it is going to, what are we losing along the way? What are we gaining along the way? What do you see as the progression? What are we, where are we headed to?
Me personally or the field? The field?
The field.
Yeah. I like to think that the field is becoming more eclectic, that we consider that we're willing to be cross-disciplinary, so that we're willing to blend different theoretical perspectives rather than remain in silos. Which is, by the way, that's the kind of work I like to do. I like to be able to bridge different silos. And hopefully, there will be more of that in the future. In other words, to be able to merge different theoretical paradigms, for example, the distinction to me, I always thought it was not a good distinction, between micro and macro. Mm-hmm. If you work in organizations like I did, I always felt like, it's not one versus the other. The micro decisions or the strategic decisions, for example, do reflect a lot of micro processes. So that's another thing, right? How do you blend micro and macro processes? I like to think that we're going to become more interdisciplinary. I really hope that we can do that. It's difficult. It's difficult because we, as academics, as you know, we tend to become kind of tribal, like in a tribe. So we tend to become very narrow. But if we want to make progress, I think that's the way we have to do. We have to be able to cross boundaries and bring variables from OB to strategy to HR. Because that's how the real world functions. That's how organizations function.
When you meet a PhD student or junior faculty that don't really have a great idea that they are working on, they're asking for your advice on what to work on. Okay, everyone says, you have to work on something that you're passionate about. I give you that part. But what was a great idea for them to pursue? Beyond family business, beyond the interdisciplinary work, what are the interesting topics that we will be picking up in the next 5 to 10 years?
See, but that is the question. The first question is, will it be interesting? It is interesting. It is important enough to work on. So when a PhD student comes to me, I want to be able to see, part of that is intuition. is this question that interesting? Is this question important? Because that's what's going to sell the paper. That's what's going to sell your paper. I mean, and I like to tell them, think like a little kid, give me 5 reasons why this is that important, right? Really, because that is the key question. Because in the end, you're going to have to sell it. You're going to have to sell that this is something,
Okay. So, Luis, who had the most impact on your academic upbringing? Who had the most influence on you?
Oh, I would say in academia, my good friend Henry Tosi, who's now retired. Henry Tosi was the department chair at the University of Florida. And he hired me, my first academic job. And, Henry, he's retired now. He clearly pushed me forward, and he's a macro guy. He's an interesting guy. He's a mixture of micro guy, or theory type of person. And I really like the way he, I would give him papers, he would look at it and he would say, cut out the first 5 pages, throw them out, start on page number 6. He was very good at focusing on things. And he and I we work on a bunch of papers. He's retired now. We publish a lot of those papers in SMJ, MJ, those kinds of places. And he also helped me with the ownership stuff.
Ownership of
on the influence of dominant owners.
Okay.
Organizations.
Okay.
So I would say Henry Tosi would be the main person.
When you look at junior faculty or even PhD students, what are some of the common mistakes that you see across young scholars?
Yes, I think the most common mistake, and I tell them that, is who they picking the wrong person to work with. I mean, that's not kind of obvious, but it's very much so. I tell them, research work is teamwork. Research work is like a small business. And depending on who you bring into your team, you're going to be successful or you're going to fail, which means that you really have to pick very carefully who you work with. I mean, that's what I tell them. Because now, how do you figure that out? I said, look at people's vita, look what they have done. And then you have to know where your strengths and weaknesses are, because you want to pick up you want to pick a team of people that are going to complement what you're good at or what you're weak at. And I think that's the key there. Yeah, most papers now, I think 95% of papers are co-authored. And the key to success is who you bring into your team. And I tell them, you have to be entrepreneurial, because no one is going to, at the PhD level, for the most part, you have to be the one picking your team. You have to be the one choosing who you're going to be working with. And to me, frankly, I think that's the key to success.
Which skills were most difficult to develop?
I believe the writing skills, become a good writer, that's the most difficult thing.
How did you do
have
it?
to keep practicing and practicing.
Okay, that's, how many times do you have to edit your work? When you write a paper, how many times do you edit your paper?
Oh, gosh, at least 20 times.
Wow.
At least 20, yeah. Many, many times.
Okay.
And sometimes even a few words can make a difference.
True.
And I've been surprised with reviewers. Sometimes reviewers take one word out of context and they kill the paper because of that, or they misunderstand what you're trying to say.
Sure.
Because you use a few words that somehow they was misinterpreted, right?
Okay. About advice to not to young people, but right in the middle, the people right after tenure, mid-career faculty. What's the advice for mid-career colleagues?
I would tell them, just to keep motivated on the research, because it's easy to get sidetracked doing other things.
Service, Like, what's the sidetrack?
Well, sidetrack could be administrative things, or committee work, or
Okay.
editorial work. I mean, it's great to be an associate editor, but I do see associate editors that are barely out of tenure, and you got 4 years doing that. I mean, that's going to consume all your time.
Sure.
And 10 years from now, I don't think people are going to remember that you were an associate editor. People are going to be looking at your papers, right? So my advice is really to be careful not to be sidetracked into other activities that take you away from, from doing research. I mean,
Thank you.
it's easy to do because you're going to get all kinds of I get phone calls every day. Do this, do that, do that, do the other. Would you like to do this? And then you could be working full time doing other things. Right? Easily.
True. Okay. I mean, your mind is so crisp on how to start the process, how the paper is written. Okay. Last question for the sake of time. What's the question I should have asked you but haven't?
About which one?
What's the question I should have asked you but haven't?
Well, one question is what's happening, a broad question, what's happening to the field, the management field in general, in terms of publications. I am a bit concerned, frankly, that, journals, because of the huge volume of manuscript they get, that journals have become too dispersed when it comes to associate editors. Someone told me something like there are 300 associate editors that change every 3 or 4 years. The top journals. That might be an exaggeration, but I mean, if you look at Or Science, AMJ, a lot of those journals, there's a lot of associate editors, and they change, every 3 years. Part of my concern is that there's such a diversity of associate editors and reviewers that there is a lot more, my sense is a lot more randomness in the review process than it used to be. Right? Because before you had like a person like Mike Hitt, who was the editor of the Academic Management Journal, he would handle all the papers. And there were maybe 2 or 3 associate editors. So there was a much better feel for where they were coming from. And I think now there's a lot more, there's a lot more dispersion. And it had to do with the sheer volume of papers, really. There are so many papers that no single editor can manage them. And that's what
this is interesting.
The luck, if you happen to be lucky and you get the right person, the right reviewer.
I mean, you're talking about continuity, right? Continuity and consistency in the review process, in the publication process.
Consistency. There's a lot, in my opinion, there's far more inconsistency now than it used to be.
Is this happening because the field is evolving and maturing, or is this happening because people are saying, the editor should remain, editor-in-chief should remain there for a certain number of years, and then the entire team is replaced? What is it?
Oh, I think part of the problem, and this is my other views on this, is that the whole idea of theoretical extension that many journals are pushing for, in my view, is kind of backfiring to some extent because it leads to theoretical fragmentation, not theoretical extension. So theoretical fragmentation, which is something that Pfeffer talked about 25 years ago. So rather than developing paradigm consensus, we are incentivizing a lot of fragmentation, and that concerns me.
Interesting.
Yeah, that concerns me.
Is there a solution to this?
That's a great question. It's something that I talked to with a number of people, my friend Ansui, I talked to my head, I talked to a number of people about this. No one seemed to have a solution to the problem. Because it has become like a cultural norm that papers have to provide theoretical extension, which is, that in itself is nothing wrong with that. But the problem is the way it has been operationalized, in my opinion, is that it's ending up in theoretical fragmentation, not extension. When you tweak a variable here, tweak a variable there, you mix variables from two different theories, which are looking at the premises of both of those theories. And that to me concerns me. So can that be fixed? I'm not sure. I don't know how, I guess it would take a cultural change. I think for one thing, I think we need to value empirical findings a bit more, like we used to. But by moving away from the empirical contributions to the so-called theoretical contributions, I do think we have an issue with theoretical fragmentation.
So basically, you want to see more empirical work in
or valued, to value empirical work and empirical findings as a way to provide the basis for additional research, to value that more.
Okay.
Yeah.
For the sake of time, thank you so much, Luis. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you for your time.
No, thank to you. I appreciate it. And great. Very nice. Take care.